All right, I'm very excited to introduce Rashel, who has been serving her fellowship term with the Allensworth Progressive Association this year. Rashel, please take it away.
Okay, so my presentation on Nuestras Historias, our stories in English, creating extreme weather resiliency plan through storytelling. So before getting started with the presentation, I'm just going to give an acknowledgement to the Indigenous community and the research that I did on in their lands. So Allensworth, California is on the ancestral lands of the Okuts, which includes the federally recognized Tachi Okut tribe and Tule River Indian tribe. Allensworth lies within the traditional territory of the Wool people, known as the area of the Beaver. The Wool village of Chalan was located near present-day Allensworth, moving with the tides of Ba'ashi, now called Tulare Lake. We honor and respect the enduring connections that these tribes and their ancestors have to this land. And so before moving on to kind of talking about my host site, I'm going to give a brief overview of my journey and how I came to become GrizzlyCorps with Allensworth Progressive Association. So I was born and raised in the Central Valley, and I pursued my undergraduate. I moved up to Northern California, where I got my undergraduate in Humboldt State University, now known as Cal Poly Humboldt. I majored with a BS in wildlife conservation biology and vertebrate ecology, where I was able to expand my passions with conservation and environmental health. And so post-undergrad, I knew that I wanted to find an internship that intersected conservation and environmental health, and that led me to Allensworth Progressive Association. So a little bit about the history of my host site, Allensworth, California. It was founded in 1908 by Colonel Allen Allensworth, a retired Buffalo soldier who created and established one of the first cities in California, governed and operated by African Americans to live and thrive without oppression. It is one of the first cities in California most notable for its success in linking land ownership and Black settlement. But due to its success in many of these businesses, having hotels, grocery stores, established farms, it became a target for environmental and systemic racism, leading to land degradation and resource deprivation that we see today, with high levels of arsenic in the soil and water contamination. Currently, the living community is approximately 600 people that are mostly Latinx farm workers whose primary language is Spanish. And so we see these environmental and systemic racism affecting the community today with increased risks from extreme weather events like flooding and drought, and exacerbating challenges in food and water security and their livelihoods. And so food and water are one of the main resources to having a sustainable food system. And so one of my tasks here in Allensworth was to be part of the design process in creating a resilient farm system. And so I did this with two of the main projects. The first one being a plant inventory, which led me to creating storytelling events, Nuestras Historias, in English, our stories. And so first coming to Allensworth, I did a plant inventory to identify the vegetation and the tree life that was in the area. And so the purpose of this was to see the plant inventory, the plants that were resilient, to see the local plants that were resilient to the environmental stressors. And so I did my initial search on iNaturalist, expanded my search up until January 1924, up until the start of my fellowship in September. And you can see on the left side that most of the plants identified were at the state park, but none of the plants were identified in the local community. And so I moved on to Calscape to see the native plants that were previously identified in the town. And most of the plants identified were either around the town, but none of them were identified in the city of Allensworth. And you can see that there were estimates of the plant ranges. And so in October, it's when I started doing my data collection, going to households and learning more about the local flora that residents had in their backyards. And so this is a photo of kind of my initial data collection process, where you can see there is a variety of plants growing in Allensworth. And so these are some of the plants that I was able to identify in the city that residents were growing or were found there previously. And so with this inventory, I was able to categorize them in different categories: if they were ornamental, if they were a native plant species, their medicinal usage, the pollinators that they attracted, fire and drought resilience, soil drainage, water usage. And so this plant inventory can be served not only to see which plants grow in Allensworth, but also looking at the social aspect of why residents are growing certain plants. And throughout these plant inventories and home assessments, to me, they weren't just another data point on a map or another plant ID on a Google sheet, but they were rather a story behind every plant species that I was identifying. And so I decided to create storytelling events, not only with the plant species, but also conversations that I was having with residents regarding the different environmental conditions that they were experiencing. So water quality, flooding and droughts, and then again, the plant inventory that I did. I went with, so this is like the initial draft or outline that was created with one of my co-workers, Valerie Hasso, who is the director of community engagement. And so we started off with the three kind of central themes and started to building off on what we wanted the outcomes of these storytelling events. So to connect with community members, learn about their relationship with the land, and provide a space to share knowledge, intergenerational knowledge between the older generation and the younger generation. And so we added the first event, Journey to Allensworth, to give residents a clearer understanding of what the storytelling events were about, and also having a final event, a gallery walk, to have a culmination of not only the stories, but all the data that I was sharing with residents as I'm creating this resiliency plan. And so one of my favorite storytelling events was Plants in Allensworth, where we had Jennifer Nunez from CAF come out and share the Three Sisters story. I was able to share data that I collected during the plant inventory. And then we had refreshments of plants that, of edible plants that were identified throughout the plant inventory. And then at the end, I gave out plants as a reminder and appreciation for their time coming into these events. And so one of the highlights for me during this event was this plant called Purslane in English and Verdulaga in Spanish. And that was the starter for the conversation that we were having during the event. Many of the residents were identifying or said that to them in their household, it was a weed, but to others, it was an edible plant that they used in their foods, in their tamales, in their carnitas, in their eggs. So it was wonderful to see how everyone had different views on certain plants and how their usage changed. And then on the left side, the nopales were actually one of the most notable plants that I was able to I identified during the plant inventory, and so we had that as one of our light refreshments. And so to end off the events, I did a gallery walk actually not too long ago. And so during this gallery walk, there were several components that were built off of each other during the events. And so you can see the variety of food that was presented, which were refreshments that we had during each of the events. And each of these dishes had a personal story. So the nopales, the tamales had a story behind them. And the people that made these dishes were from the community. And so one of the conversations that I had with Carlos Gomez from Interpretation was how seeing the outline for the storytelling event, it was amazing to see something come to life, be tangible, being residents being able to walk into the space and being able to touch the stories, touch the photography. So that was wonderful to see as they were walking into the space. And so the bottom left two photos are plants that were given out to residents. The plants initially came from two of the residents' homes. And then later I started getting plants from a local nursery. But one of the highlights for me for these plants was when a resident walked in during the last storytelling event and she brought aloe vera. Aloe vera is a plant that many residents use for if they have dry skin or for other medicinal uses. And so she walked in with one of these plants to share with other community members as she appreciated her time during these events. And so that was a full circle to me, coming from giving out these plants to residents, coming and sharing their plants with others. And so at the end of the plant inventory and the storytelling, this is one of the quotes that kind of came up or that I was able to identify during the process of creating the resiliency plan, is we center the voices of those who are directly impacted by the outcomes of the design process. Oftentimes, knowing people and place is essential for creating a future design that it's going to primarily be impacting the residents that live in these communities. Yeah, just want to give thank you to my host site and the community members that really made these projects possible.